Hey everyone, Crewcaster here, and today we're going to talk about augment builds for PSO2 New Genesis. So here I have a presentation for you guys, kind of going through a whole bunch of different augments that you can use throughout the game. But if you're looking on how augmenting actually works, I have a separate video for that, which I'll link in the upper right. Getting into this though, let's actually establish our categories for the capsules. So we're actually going to be separating them out based on how much they cost in the personal shop or the player shop. So for the first category, it's cheap, 1,000 to 10,000 meseta per capsule, and then kind of in the middle of the road, 10,000 to 100,000, and then expensive ones, which are 100,000 plus meseta per capsule. I'm not going to talk about every augment in the game because that would take way too long. I'm just going to give you recommendations that fall into these different price ranges. And then first off, we're going to do the cheap ones, and I'll give an example build, and then we'll move on to the rest. Starting off with the cheap capsules though, we have Basic 3. And what I mean by that is Might 3, Precision 3, and Technique 3. So these all give 2% potency based on the weapon type. So the Might is melee, Precision is ranged, and Technique is technique. Potency in simple terms is just extra damage. And then to tell what your weapon uses, based on its PA icons, or the icon in the upper left when you're examining it, is red for melee, blue for ranged weapons, and yellow for technique weapons. But potency is essentially the biggest focus on what we're looking for in these augments. But to actually get these basic 3s normally besides the player shop, you can obtain them in exploration regions, field races, mission pass, seasonal events, and more. Next, we have Soul 3. So there's a ton of enemies or bosses in the game which drop their individual souls. So some examples here are Didal Soul 3, Ragra Soul 3, and Am Soul 3, but there's much more than that, of course. So with these, the main variation between them is their substat bonus. So this one gives photon power, this one gives HP, this one gives HP and photon power, but all of them give potency of some type. So this Didal Soul gives melee weapon potency plus 2.5%, this one gives ranged, and this one down here gives technique. But for obtaining these normally, you go to combat zones mainly, but you want to just search for specific bosses and where they are located at for the specific Soul 3 that you would want. I'll be putting a list of all the augments in the game, including these boss souls, so you don't have to try to figure that out yourself, in the description down below. Moving on to the next cheap augment though is Doable 3s. So with those, they're hybrid capsules that give 1.75% potency for 2 different types. So Melro Doable 3s will give melee and ranged, Raw Tech will give ranged and tech, and then Mel Tech will give melee and tech. These are easily obtainable in exploration regions and sometimes handed out in mission passes and seasonal events. Then we have Secreta 3 or Alt Secreta 3. So with this capsule, it is a big penalty, but also a nice positive. So with these, they minus your HP by 10 and also minus your damage resistance by 1.5%. But it gives you 2% potency, so for all damage types, and then 2% potency floor, or increases your minimum damage that you can do by 2%. But with these, you can only obtain them from one enemy type, and that's the Alters enemy type, and specifically at nighttime. So these are like mutated animals, and the main thing to tell them apart from everything else is the giant yellow blobs for their weak spots that have a red dot in the center, such as this one here. Next though, we have something called Deft Basic or Deft Might, Precision, and Technique. So these are exactly like Alt Secreta, but without any of the penalties, but separated out into their 3 categories of weapon type instead of that generic potency. But regardless, these are still really good to use, especially early game if you can get your hands on them. Previously, they were only through the Augment exchange, which was very expensive, but now they can be obtained from Mega Lodix enemies, and these are the enemies that have the elite prefix, and they're kind of highlighted in like a blue purplish glow. With these, they can only spawn in like level 35 plus zones, however, so you won't be able to see these until then. Up next, we have Super Basic 1s. So with these, they give a potency for 2.25% of a specific type, so Might, Precision, or Technique. The only way you can obtain these normally though is through the Cannonball modes, Cannonball Rumble, and Cannonball Strike, and these are exclusively in the Caveris region, so you won't be able to access these until you can get there. And then for the final cheap capsule, we have Gigas 2. So it has the Might, Technique, and Precision versions, and these give HP plus 10 and 2% for a potency type. So these can be obtained from Gigantics level 24 and up, and Captains 24 and up. The Gigantics are like the malevolent enemies is their prefix, and they glow purple and they're exclusive to bosses. So they can be found usually in purple triggers or in the open world during storms. But then with Captains, these can show up anywhere during trials, and they're like these little ball enemies which explode into a whole bunch of different capsules. So that is pretty much the whole list of all the cheap capsules that I would recommend to you. But for an example build here of what I think is the best, so I would put a Gigas Might 2, a Didal Soul 3, an Alt Secreta 3, a Deft Might, and a Super Might 1 for a Might cheap build. And all this put together will give you 11.2% potency per armor or weapon that you kind of like put all of this onto. And the reason why it's 11.2% instead of 10.75% is because this is not additive, it's actually multiplicative with each other. So if you were to use a build like this on all of your armor and your weapon, you can actually get around 53% potency just through augments alone. So this doesn't even include your weapon's potential or any of your armor's extra potency bonuses. And then if you were just to buy this all in the personal shop yourself without having anything, this would only cost around 200,000 to 300,000 meseta in total for a complete build. But now let's move on to the middle of the road augments that cost around 10,000 to 100,000 meseta per capsule. So for the first one, we have Basic 4. So this is the same as the Might 3s, Precision 3s, and the Technique 3s, but just an increase in tier. So these go from 2% to 3% potency of their respective types. But with these, however, there isn't as many options as the previous version had. So with these, you can only obtain them from field races sometimes. It's not quite good of a chance, but if you want a guaranteed one, you have to do mining rig urgent quests at specific ranks. So Alio rank 3 will give you Might 4s, Retem rank 3 will give you Precision 4s, and Gavaris rank 2 will give you Technique 4s. They'll give you 3 guaranteed at least for each of those. You can also do the trigger quests version of these as well to get those guaranteed. Next, we have Soul 4s. So these are pretty much the same as the previous versions as well, but going to that 3% potency instead of 2.5. No change to their respective substats. But these can be obtained from level 60 plus bosses, and also urgent quests can guarantee them. So the Renus rank 3 can give Renus Soul 4, Dustal rank 3 can give Dust Soul 4, and then so on based on the boss you're trying to go for. Then we have Gigas 3s. So this is also just an increase in tier once again, but this actually increases the HP slightly from 10 to 15, and then the potency from 2% to 2.5%. These can be obtained from Gigantics level 39 plus and Captains 39 plus, so just a level difference there. But then we actually have something new for this category, and that's Dreadkeeper 3s. So these give a whole bunch of stats besides potency. So it's kind of like or up in the air based on who you ask, but this gives HP plus 30, photon power plus 7, potency floor increase by 2%, and damage resistance plus 2%. So very nice capsule to have for tankiness and overall stat increases, but like I said, it doesn't really do much for your DPS besides giving you that increase for your minimum damage. But these can be obtained from what are called veteran or dread enemies, and these are boss enemies specific to exploration zones that have set spawns, and to get the tier 3 version you need to at least kill a level 30 plus version or kill captains that are level 30 plus. And then for the last one in the middle of the road price, but shouldn't really be there, are Tria capsules, specifically Starro and Guaro versions. So with the Trias, they are negative for a certain stat based off their prefix here. So the Starro means minus HP, and then the Guaro here means minus damage resistance. There's other ones that minus your photon power or even your potency floor, but I wouldn't really recommend using those because they can lower your overall DPS. But with these, they give you a 2.25% potency for a specific type based off that suffix. So Mel for melee, Tech for technique, and Ra for ranged. But these can only be obtained in what is called the Geometric Labyrinth in Retem, but the reason why these can actually be in the middle of the road instead of the cheap side is because basically nobody does this mode because not a lot of people actually like doing it because it takes so long and isn't very rewarding, as you can tell through these capsules. So this is just like an alternate if you don't really have any other options, or maybe if we get more slots later on and don't know what to fill it with, but I wouldn't really recommend using this too much. That's it though for the middle of the road capsules. So what I would actually recommend in a middle of the road build that can include cheap capsules is this precision example here. So precision 4, Rigorous Soul 4, Alt Secreta 3, Def Precision, and Gigas Precision 3. So this can total out when multiplied together to 13.1%, because once again, potency is multiplied together and not additive. But if you put this build on every single piece of gear that you have, this can total out to 64% potency through augments alone. But wait a second, you may have noticed that I put capsules in here that are lower potency than ones that were recommended or supposed to be. So like super capsules or the Tria capsules that have 2.25% potency instead of this 2% from the Secreta or Deft Precision. So the reason why I put these here is because a 2% potency plus a 2% floor potency capsule is overall more DPS than one that is just 2.25% potency. But with this build, ultimately, if you're just a regular player that doesn't care about min-maxing every individual piece that they have, this would be what I would shoot for. Especially as you saw earlier, this is up to 64% potency with just those augments combined, but it's about a 10 times cost for only 10 extra percent. So definitely want to get into these expensive ones next because they can cost even way more than 10 times of these augments. But getting into the first one here, we have Gigas 4. So this is another tier increase for the Gigas capsules, where it takes the HP from 15 to 20, so another 5 HP, and then it takes the potency from 2.5% to 3%. And so with this though, it can only drop from Gigantics currently that are 69 plus, because Captains can currently not get to that level 69 plus yet. But who knows if they'll even let Captains drop this high of a tier. But to the next one, we have an example of a very expensive augment that isn't actually very good. So this is Decold Might, Technique, or Precision. So this gives you 2.5% potency of that specific type. So that's kind of nice, but then it gives you something called Low Temp Damage Resistance plus 25%. So that's exclusive to a region in Kavaris called the Rayford Gorge. So what this low temp damage does there is that it starts reducing the damage that it does over time because it's so cold or the temperature is so low there that you'll start taking damage and even freezing. But once you reach 100% of this resistance, you can actually be immune to that effect. But the reason why I say this is pretty much useless is you can get to 100% through other means such as food, region mag, boosters, etc. But the main reason why these augments are so bad is because of the obscene crafting cost to actually make these things. Because you can only make them, you can't actually get them to drop yet. So you have to go to an NPC called Resso, which first you need to complete quests for to unlock their shop. And then once you do, you need a Decold Standard 3, which in itself requires Icicle Cubes and Blizzardium to make, or can rarely drop in Cannonball modes like Strike and Rumble. And then you need 5 Gigas 3s of a particular type, depending on which one you want to make, and then 100 Icicle Orbs, which is just crazy. But all of these are the reason why this augment costs so much, not because it's particularly good, but because it just takes a lot of time and money and effort to actually make one of these things. But if these augments gained a way to actually obtain them very easily, then I could definitely recommend them in the cheap category, but not in the middle of the road, and especially not the expensive builds. Moving on though, we have Addy capsules. So these are particularly interesting because they give pretty big bonuses for a main stat and a substat. So they're kind of broken up into kind of two parters. So the prefix, so like Deft, gives potency floor, Gua gives damage resistance, Ward gives all down resistance or like status resistance, so like the lightning, fire, poison, etc. And then Sta gives HP, and then Spit or Spirit gives photon power. And then with the suffix, it's the same as Tria capsules, so the Mel is melee potency, Ra is ranged, and Tech is technique. But with these, they can only be obtained from AC scratches, specifically the support item select ones that show up every few months. So real money only, unfortunately. So this is the only pay-to-win capsule, however. But if you want to obtain it as a free-to-play player, you can do so as long as those players sell it in the personal shop. Thankfully, though, with these, they have a success rate of 100%. So when you obtain just one of the capsule, you can just automatically stick it on whatever piece of gear, and it'll guarantee to be on there. Then for the final capsule, we have Mastery 4. So we haven't actually mentioned this one yet, but this gives potency all around up to 2.5%, potency floor to 2.5%, and damage resistance 2.5%. So all positives for both doing damage and also giving you some extra tankiness. So because of that, this makes this capsule in particular the best in the game that we currently have. But that makes it really expensive, in addition to it only being craftable in the Augment Capsule Item Exchange using previous masteries and minerals. And the way to obtain previous masteries is through captains, which can drop mastery 1 to 3s, kind of just random, and it gives you 3 in total. And then Stellar Graces, which is an event that sometimes happens, can give you mastery 2s. And then Retem Yellow Triggers, rank 1, can give you a single mastery 1. But to go from mastery 1s to 4s requires 1,000 mastery 1s, I believe, to make a single mastery 4. So you definitely want to go for captains instead. But that was all of the expensive augments. So what kind of build would I make using anything at my disposal? So for a technique build example, I have Technique 4, Amsol 4, Gigas Technique 4, Addy Def Tech, which gives that extra floor as well in comparison to the other Addies, and then a Mastery 4. So with all that combined, you get a 14.8% potency per armor and weapon that you get this build onto. But all of this combined, if you put it on every single piece, you get a whopping 74% potency through just augments, which is insane. But with this build, you'll be spending the big bucks for sure. So like Mastery alone is around 2 mil a pop, and then the Addy capsules range between like 2 mil to 10 mil, depending on which one you're trying to get, even though it is that 100% success rate. So some of these capsules are even way more expensive several times over than just making a cheap build in its entirety. So like a few 100,000 for the cheap build, or are you going to spend like 100 mil to complete that expensive build? That's kind of up to you if you care about min-maxing that hard. But yeah, that is pretty much all of the augments that I recommend using and some alternatives for October 2022. So if I was starting out though, I'd kind of just follow this chart, at least up until the middle of the road. So I'd start with cheap builds, or just going through the game in general. And once you get close to like level 60, 65, then I'd work on towards the middle of the road capsules. Then if I cared to stick around with the game long enough and really like min-maxing, I would start trying to purchase some of these or earn these for the game. And of course, we've been mainly talking about using DPS stuff. So if you care to go on the more tanky side, like you're not comfortable with like countering or things like that, I do have a tank build here, which specifically uses like more HP stuff, damage resistant souls, and also Gua instead of Deft. And then instead of Alt Secreta, uses Dreadkeeper 3 for that big boost in stats. Hopefully this guide helped you guys out. And as an extra bonus, I'll be linking this exact presentation down in the description down below so you can reference it for later. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.